Hi, Prashant. Welcome to the CTQ Smartcast.
Hi, Harish.
Yeah,
And you are.
yeah. Prashant, I choose to think we say that we help teams and individuals build future relevance in a shape-shifting world through systematic upleveling. So we wanted to pick your brains on a bunch of things around how people should be thinking about their future careers and how organizations should also be thinking, all in the service of being future relevant. I'll start off with the first question here. So we are in a shape changing world. What should people do to develop the mindset required to be able to not just deal with that kind of a world, but also thrive in it? What is the mindset that people should be developing?
I think the answer lies in your question itself, Harish. You said that it's a shape changing world. I think the most important thing that individuals need to build is to first recognize the fact that it is changing. Right? It might sound like a cliche because we keep hearing these statements like change is the only thing that is constant and all. It's been said so many times that people tend to ignore it. But then, if you look at the happenings of the last year and a half, everything is changed around us, right? But there's not been one piece that it's not been impacted. Now, the key thing is to realize that whether, and these times might end, better times would come in, but this should be a lesson saying that there is indeed truth in statements such as those. Now, when things change, we have two options, right? One option is that we change along with the tide because the change happens, but I think the winners would be the one who control the tide, right? If you're able to actually anticipate change. So the reason why I'm bringing this in is because I sincerely believe that what has happened in the last year, couple of years, should be a lesson for all of us to be able to actually look at our lives and be able to stretch it forward a bit, imagine, create hypothesis, and then create scenarios so that when something of this sort happens, I hope something not as drastic as this, but whenever there is a quote unquote disruption in our lives, we will have some kind of playbooks ready by which you are not taken completely unaware, but you are seemingly in control of the way things play out. That itself would give an individual or an organization an advantage to deal with such times.
In fact, I was just reminded of a quote that I heard a few days ago. Manan was mentioning about this quote that is attributed to Wayne Gretzky, the ice hockey legend. That it's not that you should be going after the puck; you have to go where the puck will be. So it's about thinking like that, thinking where the future is going to be, and be prepared for that.
True. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, there's so many analogies one can draw from sports and sports legends, right? It's fun to connect dots across sports and anything that happens in our lives.
In fact, I was going to ask you about that, Prashant. Any of these parallels from worlds like sports, right? And I know you are a sports fanatic, also a cricket tragic in some ways. So, what are the kind of parallels that you draw, and do you see merit in these parallels that you draw from other fields like sports?
No, no, absolutely. In fact, we'll come to the sports part, but I feel that in order to be ready, it's not just sports. It's extremely important that individuals and even organizations have a role to create an atmosphere for individuals. It's very important for individuals to derive from different fields. See, because I'm a big fan of this philosophy. I mean, when we are, say, studying in school or college, we are by force subject to knowledge coming in from diverse fields. So it's not just the STEM fields. You also learn about history, geography, languages. You learn from all of this. Sometimes philosophy, economics. You learn all of this, and it's by force. And the mind gets trained to eclectic views. So it's not just a logical, rational left brain view, but you are also subject to other views that is typically called as a right brain view. As we start getting specialized, as we start getting into specialized education, or as we start getting into specialized areas of work, unfortunately it becomes one-sided and one-tracked, right? The development of the brain then starts getting skewed towards one particular direction. It's good initially when you're only working on that field, but as you rise higher, when you have to take decisions, that's when you realize that your decision can tend to be very one sided if you are not aided by perspectives from the other side. Of course, there are ways around it. But then, like I said, it's important for organizations and for individuals to make sure that they're continuously being subject to knowledge coming in from other fields, either through reading, either through interactions, either through drawing connections, such as places from like sports, film, politics for that matter, and that kind of just enriches the entire decision making framework for the individual.
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to bring your attention to the specific example that you spoke about, where people need to move from these managerial kind of roles to, say, executive or leaders. So, if people want to move up that ladder, and we're going to talk about the specific example of managers, there is this whole individual contributor versus manager. Let's deal with that separately. But for the manager to the executive leader, if you want to make that change, what specific ways in which people can actually start thinking about making that switch?
Okay, so I'm going to be prescriptive based on my evaluation of the averages, right? So it
Right.
doesn't mean that people do not have this already built in, but somehow, if I look at the averages, I think the biggest thing one needs to move away from is move to is an outside in thinking. We are mostly programmed to be inside out in our thinking because it's the easiest thing for us to do, right? So the life you're living, the challenges you're facing. So you extrapolate what could happen later, what could happen next based on an inside out thinking. Whether it is selling a product, okay, or whether it is selling and rising up as an individual in an ecosystem. I think the answer always lies in what's the value you're generating in the market or in the ecosystem. And the value generation is usually judged outside in. So the consumer of your service, the consumer of your product, or the consumer of your company, okay, I'm talking about even personal reactions, is lies outside you and not inside you. For example, it could be a client, or it could be an audience to who you're giving a talk to. You have to realize what is their perception of value, and then make sure that whatever you're delivering as a product, service, or as an individual interaction is catering to that value. Only when that happens would you rise in stature. Now, so moving in our thinking to be outside in. So whether it is the client, or whether it's your boss, or whether, like I said, it's an audience, that is the first mindset change that I would prescribe to people. Now, what's the question you need to ask? The question you need to ask is what I'm providing some differentiated, right? Is it something where my consumer or the stakeholder would come back to me because I provide a differentiated value? Or is it lying along with the averages? Because if it's among the averages, then you get commoditized, right? So you either get hit on prices, you will have to discount, or it becomes a matter of chance that you'd be considered for something. But the moment you differentiate yourself, the moment you become a Rishabh Pant in the batting lineup, he's not a person who will score at 120 average. When he gets going, he will score at 180 or 200. That's very differentiates. And you cannot have a T20 team, for that matter, a one-day team, and these days even a test team without him, because he makes a difference. So that is what you need to provide to be noticed and to be considered.
Right. Yeah. So I was going to ask you about one aspect that you mentioned about you being very comfortable. So you definitely need to go out of your comfort zone. So any concrete ways in which people can do this within their corporate structure? We often talk about experimentation and projects to take up. So how do you build that kind of thinking?
Yes, again, there is no one single plane to which you graduate. There are some people who are naturals in terms of this thinking. So they might be in a certain function, that, but they make sure that they glue around to various other activities in the function, in the company. So they would be part of company town halls, whether it is part of your function or not. They would make sure that they attended. They'll read about the company. They'll read about other companies. So they'll be all glued in. So they're externally glued as well as glued within the company. And when I say glued in, I'm also saying that they're tacitly also connecting dots. So when they hear, say, a financial statement, they're hearing it in the context of what the company's past performance has been, what other companies in that area are doing it, and they benchmark and they're able to do it. Now, this is training. Right? So you are getting ready. So this is the least amount, because whether you like it or not, you would be subject to these kind of things happening in the company. So at that point of time, it's important for you to be tuned in, right? So it's just being an active participant. It need not be always by asking questions, but being alert, by being switched on. Now, the next level of participation would be actually by networking with people outside your functions. If I'm into product development, I need to understand how marketing works. I should know how sales works. I should know how HR works. What are their constraints? What's their key result area? How do they contribute to the company? It's very important, especially when you rise. Initially, I would strongly suggest that become experts in your field. But once you've established a reasonable presence in your field, I think it's very important for you to network to other functions. Because eventually what happens is when one has to deliver value to the client, it happens as a combination of both, of all these entities coming together. It's not just because of one thing, but it's a combination of everything coming together that leads to the success, right? Uh, if you start building in that perspective, then you will see everything that's happening to you as an individual, or to your group within the function, or to the company as a whole. You'll start viewing it from a different lens. Okay, you start, as an example, if there is a change in focus on a certain product, you will realize why it is happening, because otherwise it's very easy for you to feel victimized. But then the moment you start seeing it from top down, you'll start realizing, okay, this is the reason why it has happened. It's not really that bad, or better times would come. So it's very easy then for you to be at peace, even at work. That's the least expected. But then you could also then start rising in levels where you make some of those changes happen as well.
Right, right. So, Prashant, one thought that came to mind when you were mentioning these things was, how did you do any of these things back when you were still learning the ropes, right? Any anecdotes that you can think of? And was this a realization that happened to you that this is what is making me different, or did you actually have the mentoring of someone who actually told that these are the kind of things that you should be doing? How did that happen for you?
So it was all of the above. So it was not just one single thing. If I have to go back, I probably was at best somewhere in between an introvert and an extrovert. But then the people that I hung around with naturally, the one good thing that I can probably lean in on is I've been able to have a set of friends at every stage that have remained. So whether it's school friends, they still remain school friends, whether it's junior college or from my previous companies, they've remained to be friends. So even outside of work, I've been able to connect with them on a frequent basis, and they've ended up doing different things in life. So they're not necessarily in the same field. So the very fact that socially I'm able to go back and interact with them gives me a different perspective. I would not say I'm the most voracious reader, but I'm not bad either. Reading from books, reading articles of late in the last 10 years, being hooked on to good feeds on social media like Twitter, that has helped. But at the same time, I think if I look at my last 10, 15 years professionally, I think I made a conscious effort to be connected with people outside. I'm from the product development side of things, but I've made a conscious effort to be connected with marketing people, with sales people. In fact, some of my closest friends are from these particular fields. So you constantly hear about their challenges, and more importantly, if you're able to extrapolate, so what can I do to make their life easier? The moment you start answering questions such as these, that's when you start building in that outside in perspective, right? That's number one. Number two is I always have relished the opportunity of being with clients. Number one. Number two, also being the leader in that group, front ending client meetings. It's not about that moment of truth, but it's about the preparation that leads to that moment of truth, which I believe is extremely important experience to have for people. Because like I said, again, in that experience, in that entire process of preparation, you build upon various scenarios. What would the client ask? Who are the other people in that meeting? Who are the influencers? What are their leanings? How do you prepare for those? That itself builds in that entire outside in thought process within you, because you don't want to screw up at that moment of truth.
Yeah, again, I've had the opportunity and privilege of hearing some of those anecdotes about how to prepare for these kind of sales calls and meetings. Would you want to share anything that comes to mind about this diligence in preparation, especially in sales meetings?
Yeah, so I will start with a failure of mine. Okay, first, this was about 15 years back. It was a French client, and we had a very good cookie cutter presentation on how our company would be delivering services. And so I went along with the sales head of the region. It was a French client. Went along with the sales head of the region, feeling reasonably prepared, because that was a presentation that we used to ace always, very well prepared and all. In about 5 or 7 minutes of that presentation, the senior VP on the other side said, "Mr. Prashant, this all looks good, but then where are the specifics? I need to know specifics to this particular thing. How is this engagement going? What are the pitfalls? How do you see it happening?" And we weren't prepared for that. So it was a disaster. It was a disaster. We did a mini salvage. We got another meeting. But it was a disaster, but it was like a opening. My eyes opened because of that particular thing, saying that you cannot just go with an average preparation, in the sense what has worked for the averages. The average in a client preparation is good for statistics only. It doesn't pan out in the room, right? You can never go into a room prepared with the average. Every instance has its own nuance, and you need to be prepared for it, which is where that was my first setback, which turned out to be a learning. So I would never ever again step into a client meeting without preparation like this. Now, on the other side, excessive preparation. Again, in the same company, I was once asked to lead the engineering side on a major deal. So it was a deal that we had to win with another incumbent. And we were given about 50 minutes, 50 minutes with the chairman of this large company, large listed company in the United States. 50 minutes to convince the client that we are able partners to take over not just engineering, but the IT part as well. And that's when and I was given the charge of leading that 50-minute meeting. So this chairman was going to visit us for 50 minutes, and I had to lead everything. So 50 minutes had to be well taken care of. So I actually went through the Six Sigma methodology of failure mode analysis. So we broke down those 50 minutes, did an FMEA, and then came up with various, I had, I think, about 130 interventions that needed to be taken care of to make this 50-minute successful. Examples could be, one of them was, so there was a company lawn. We had thought that our chairman would escort that chairman and just show around the place. I made sure that the lawn was not watered that morning, because if it's watered, it gets slushy. That's number one. Number two is that one of our VPs had a habit of going overboard in presentation. So we had decided where that person would stand, and right in front of where he would stand, I had got a clock affixed so that there would be a warning. Number three, there were going to be about 15 or 20 people in the meeting room. Usually, a lot of time gets wasted in exchange of business cards. I made sure that the business cards are already exchanged. Our business cards are given to them in the drive to our office, right? So some of these things were taken care of so that we focus only on the value aspect, the content aspect during the presentation. Another thing is that we did research to find out that this chairman does not like Pepsi, but he likes Coke products, because Pepsi was not their client. Coke was their client, right? So we made sure that everything was Coke oriented. Also made sure, we found out that this chairman's daughter went to Stanford. So we had, luckily for us, our chairman's daughter had also spent some time in Stanford. So we made sure that our chairman includes that part in the. So all these small things need to be taken care of, which doesn't happen in the averages, right? In the averages, things get missed. But there is a lot to be understood in the preparation, because all we wanted at that point of time was an outside in. So this person had to perceive us to be good on all fronts.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a fantastic story in terms of diligence of preparation. I always go back to that story whenever I am thinking of similar situations. So one thing that comes to mind, Prashant, is, like you said, you always like to lead from the front. Right. But we also hear of these cases where people say that they like to do that, but there's something that is stopping them, especially in the larger organizations. Right. So many a times these opportunities won't be given to you on a platter. So how should people carve out these things for themselves? Again, if you can give me some concrete examples of how people can make sure that others have that confidence in them to try them out in certain risky situations.
Yeah, first thing is, of course, you got to build competence around yourself, right? So there is no substitute to that. You cannot just appear there and expect that you will be put. No one is going to risk putting you on situations such as these, and you have to do well in the nets before you are put in the matches, right? So there would be internal meetings, there would be small tete-a-tetes that would happen, where you need to be able to showcase that you are indeed worth it. Your value, what you speak has value, your thought process has value. There would always be net practice situations that will be available in companies. There is enough access in the companies. Access to senior leadership has flattened. It's very easy to get this access these days. The hierarchical form of companies don't hold anymore. At least in the tech industry, definitely you have access. Now with social media, you have even more access to reach these people. But doing well in the net practice sessions is extremely important. Number one. Number two, it's extremely important also to create a circle of influence in the companies, right? So it's not at all about just individual practice, but you need to make sure that you have circles of influences with who you're interacting with, who on their own would have better access to decision makers, And it's through these circles of influence also that you can do it. Now, the way I put it makes it seem like a lot of this could be artificially engineered. That's not what I meant. These things happen, right? Nothing happens immediately, but if you're investing in being good, creating value around yourself, getting even better, learning more, evolving, then the circles of influence get created on their own. Then you get net practice sessions on your own. You get invited to meetings, and then you get to play the real match. Right. So I think it's about investing in yourself and also being patient about the progress.
Right. So building your social capital both within and outside the organization, I think given we're talking about availability of channels like social media these days, is extremely important.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
The other thing is there are company parties. A lot of us don't go there. We'll say, okay, but there's so many people, but you should go there because these are chances and times where you get to interact with. It's really flattened at that point at the bar or at the dinner table. It's flattened. I mean, you could be standing next to the CEO. It's your chance to say something nice, right? Chance to comment. So that's where all the net practice would have helped to do it. So you should not refrain yourself from socializing even in professional environments. It's extremely important to have your head above the water. You cannot be Kamara kinds.
Right. But I think another important thing is when you get that opportunity at the bar with the CEO, you need to be well prepared in advance. You need to be solid in whatever you are doing to be able to have that meaningful conversation there, right?
Absolutely. You need to have played the things in the mind, right? You should have, what if I come across a senior exec or a CEO, what would I be saying? Very few people have the gift of just being very spontaneous about it. Tendulkar. So you just look at it, right? Any batsman for that matter, or for that matter, any batsman. Sachin Tendulkar is right at the top, but for that matter, any batsman, how much time does the batsman have to react to a bowler? So it's probably what, 0.3 seconds or even less than that. So imagine if the batsman has to first decide where this ball is going to fall, and then based on that decides, okay, it's over, the time is over. But usually the way they work is in terms of pattern matching. So there are played out various scenarios, right? Based on how is the ball being held, which is the direction of the arm, and all. So they play these scenarios and only prepare themselves for the shot before the shot is actually played. Right? And the great people have a reasonable, a much higher amount of accuracy in terms of their prediction of where the ball is going to be, where it's going to land, and what shot they're going to play. Right. So the greatness lies in actually being able to have practice before. It's about all that practice that's done that comes out in the playing field.
Right. Yeah. I think, but the challenge remains that you can, as a 5-year-old, you can go to a Shivaji Park and start hitting those thousands of balls, and you know that if not by age 14, as by 21, you'll be able to hit the balls the way a professional batsman should hit. But what is the equivalent of that practice in the corporate world, especially when this is not what is being taught in B schools as well, right? People need to stumble and figure this out themselves. So what is the playbook that people should adhere to?
So let's look at the cricket example only, and let's try to build on that, right? So you said cricket example, you get a ball, you have a choice, you can defend every ball. Every ball that comes in, whether it's a full toss or a short pitch ball or a good length ball or a swinging ball, you can defend the ball, right? You get no runs for it, 0 runs for that. But the same thing would happen even in a corporate scenario. You come across the CEO or a senior VP at the dinner table or picking food right next to you. And then he says, "Hi Harish, how's it going?" You have a choice. Or what's up? You have a choice saying that all good.
Food is tasty.
Food is tasty, weather is hot.
Right.
Choice, and then he just moves on. He or she will just move on out of it. But then if you have practiced enough, you are able to talk about, you'll be able to very succinctly speak about the project that you're working in or the challenges that you face. You can say that, yeah, you must have heard of this latest client that we've got. I'm the guy designing it. I'm the guy leading. And it's very challenging because it's a very different scenario. So then it preempts, it actually prompts that person to ask you the next question. And if you're lucky, if you really prepared even better, you get a meeting appointment, right? So he or she will say, the leader would say that I would like to know more about this, and can you just speak to my secretary to get, and that is victory. That is victory out there. So you have a choice. The choice is yours, but you cannot say all of that unless you have played it, unless you actually have done it, unless you. So that's what I'm saying. The content is extremely important, but this is about perception building around the content. It's about how you position yourself.
Right.
So
I think,
a
yeah.
bigger thing happen to you. So the next time a similar deal has to be done, the leader would remember that let's call Harish from the technology team over because he seems to have good ideas on.
Right. Yeah. I think it's again coming back to that outside in perspective thinking, evaluating yourself, the why around what you're doing. We'll switch tracks a bit, but then come back to this point again, because in the realm of companies, when we talk about companies needing to change their strategy and about being relevant in the future, it's easy to come up with these one-liners that this organization should pivot to something else. The problem is not in where they should be going. The problem is in figuring out how you go from here to there, right? So how should companies be thinking about this, and is there a framework around something like this, and if there is one, what are the components of it? How should companies be thinking about the how part of this?
Yeah. So there are frameworks, of course. All strategy frameworks are very prescriptive around this. And all these frameworks basically say it's as important to answer the question what you would be doing as it is to answering the question what you would not be doing. So it's about creating one of the frameworks that I normally lean into is the one prescribed by Roger Martin and A.G. Lafley in their book Playing to Win, where they have a set of questions. So one is about where will I play. So how are you defining the boundaries? So clearly about where would you play and where would you not play. So it's very clear. Certain players are saying that I'm going to focus only on test matches or I'm going to focus only on T20. So that's you basically said that, which means I will not be playing the other one. So I'll not be playing tests if I'm playing T20s. I'm going to focus only on this and do everything to become good out there. So the mental tuning, the physical practices that I have, the time spent at the gym. For example, I need to bowl only 4 overs. I don't need to bowl longer than. So how do I go all out? So all this thing would then make you good for the T20 game. You're a T20 specialist, you're that. So similar thing happens in a company that I'm going to be focusing only on the elite or elite market segment. I'm not going to be focusing on the masses, or the other way around. I'm going to be focusing only on the masses. I'm not going to be focusing on the elite segment. But that first creates the boundary line. So it's very important. Or even for individuals, stating that I'm going to be only technology. I'm going to be only this specific technology. I'm going to get rid of the depth of it. This is my differentiation. Because once you start creating that and start investing your resources, either as a company or as an individual, you now realize that in the time available, which is a limited resource, you are spending more time, more money, or more whatever resource into that and getting better than the average. Because the average would be good for all. They would be saying that we're going to spread doing this. We'll be learning this technology and that technology. But they will, when it comes to scenarios where you want to derive a premium, okay, the average gets an average value. Okay, the differentiated gets the premium. You have to realize. So the premium is available to people who are able to first create those boundaries and get better at that, right? So first question is where will I play? The next question is how will I win and what's the winning logic? Now, how will I win? What's the winning logic is an outside in thinking. It's not about how I feel that if I know this much, I should be winning. It's about saying that by doing this, the stakeholder will derive value from me. So this is about the stakeholder saying, yes, I will repeatedly go to this person for a service because I get the value. I mean, you should be able to know what are you going to do, what capabilities you will build. That's the third question. What are where will I play? How will I win? What's the winning logic? What are the capabilities I need to build? What are the capabilities you build? Okay, which is not just about developing technology skills, but it's also about creating presentation skills and storytelling to be able to sell a certain solution, right? So you build a capability around a core strength. And then, because at the end, the client wants to hear a story. The client wants to see how their business problem is going to be solved by it. Right? Not just saying that in this technology, I'm good, how we are going to use this technology. So this entire capability needs to be built around that particular story. Okay, so these are the things so there are frameworks that are defined for it. And then there is enough. I would highly recommend people reading that book as at least a starting point. There are, of course, abridged papers around it if people do not have the patience to read the book. But go through that. And what I've realized over the years that using that philosophy even to individuals' lives and professional careers also helps a lot.
Yeah, I was going to come to that because it clearly seems like a framework that can be used for individuals as well. So one thing that came to mind, Prashant, when you were saying this was organizations needing to build the knowledge around the capabilities that are required. When you are taking that outside in approach, what if, and I'm sure there will be some knowledge blind spots, right? So how should organizations deal with these knowledge blind spots? how can these unknowns be addressed? Because you are going to go with some assumptions. So have you seen any cases where these knowledge blind spots have been a challenge, and how have organizations tried to overcome them?
There are multiple ways, and I would say that every organization has its blind spots, just like every individual will have their blind spots, and more so as an organization grows. See, let's say we have let's say a small organization. The small organization market size or the segment of the market they'll be dealing with itself is limited. So what you provide, so you are aware of the space, and what you provide is you have probably covered the range of requirements that the clients in that space would have. But the moment you start growing, okay, the requirements of clients increase, so you cannot just go with that portfolio, right? The moment you go with that portfolio, you are now stating that I worked in it worked for me in this segment, it's going to work for me in the other segment. You have basically then created a blind spot for yourself, right? And you are not going to be as successful in the other segment, and then you grow even further because there are pressures to grow, then it becomes even worse. And companies that do not realize that obviously perish, but there are very few companies that actually go through that tragic story. It's not like complete perish, but then every company tries to do something to move around. So what are the various ways? Then you get people from outside, people with a broader experience to come in, and then they, depending on what their import in the companies, they're able to steer the company through another way. They work with consultants, management consultants, who come and say that it worked yesterday, for your plans of today this is not going to work. Long and short of it, I think being tuned, what I want to bring in is being tuned to what's happening in the external world, number one. Number two, allowing inputs from the external world to come in and merge with what is your strength. Now, I'm not saying replace, I'm saying merge, because you have to create the unique identity. It's very academic to say that I'll replace the whole thing, but the important thing is to be able to merge with your particular strength or your points of growth. That becomes the extremely important thing. Larger companies work on acquisitions, so they'll go and acquire companies that take care of the blind spots, and then they'll have a mechanism to bring in that company into their mainstream, right? So there are various ways in which companies deal with this.
And how do you think individuals can and deal with these kind of knowledge blind spots? And does mentoring play a role to address some of this?
Yeah, mentoring definitely plays a role. So does, like I said, being eclectic in your knowledge inputs, going and attending conferences, mixing with a lot of people, being socially active with a profession in mind. So all those things help. But mentoring, I'm glad you brought it up. Uh, because if you look at the role of a mentor, the mentor doesn't have a stake in the output, right? So the mentor is actually providing an orthogonal view, probably at a slightly elevated frame of reference, where he's able to see down on that, being able to identify the blind spot. So for example, if you are in a situation, or if you have a certain aspiration within the framework of your company, the mentor will definitely be able to provide you perspectives, uh, right? And in most cases, the mentor is usually a person with more experience, so he or she would be able to provide you perspectives based on his or her experience on how things are panned out, or the readings that the mentor would have gone through. And then they will say this is how we need to play. And even better if the mentor can actually give you an outside in view. So if the mentor is able to examine what your goals are and start from that goal and work backwards, help you build that perspective, it gets even better.
Right. And I noticed that you use the word giving perspective. So it is not really advice that you should be going to a mentor for, right?
Yes. Yeah, because let's put it this way, right? The mentor is involved in that particular problem only for that hour or couple of hours that you're dealing with. So at best, the mentor can provide you a broader perspective, but you are living that. You know the details. And like I said, it's important for the external inputs to come and merge with your strengths. Remember, I mentioned that earlier, you cannot replace it. So the mentor's perspective cannot be a replacement for what's happening now. But you need to be able to derive those 3 or 4 things out of the 20 things that came out in the discussion, and say, connect the dots, connect it to your perspective, and create your own. It's extremely important, right, in anyone's development journey, to take external inputs also from mentors, of course, but from other places also, but create your own experiences. It's your own unique perspectives, because the experience you're living is unique. No one else lives through that particular experience, but you have to be able to create your own and then create a slightly different experience for yourself. It becomes very important.
So when it comes to something like mentoring, or like you mentioned that individuals need to take charge of making sure that others are taking them seriously. in order to present some new idea or whatever. This is from an individual's point of view. So, is there a role for the organization to actually enable this kind of an environment? Do you see that as an enabler?
Of course, the organization has to create forums by which individuals get to interact with leaders. But then I would actually take one step forward in this. I will say, and if it's possible, then even organizations should do it. But otherwise, I think it's more the individual's prerogative. But if the organization can actually provide access to people from outside the organization, see, because inside the organization, again, it's like inbred, the same philosophies, you'll keep hearing it in different forms, and there are constraints also for leaders to keep saying the same thing. You cannot break free and say a few things. But I know there are a few organizations that also provide access to people from outside who don't have any constraints. They don't have to, and that is important. So it's important for those organizations, A, to provide access to people, because let's face it, right? More than a very large percent of people that work, and I'll speak from the Indian diaspora, okay, are not inherently extrovertish or good networkers. So they would expect a few things to happen to them. So if organizations can cater to that, provide them access to external people, but more importantly, allowing that relationship to flourish, I think that becomes very important for the organization, in the organization's role, because it might not necessarily always align or resonate with the organization's philosophy, because the external mentor. But then if you're reasonably secure as a company, okay, stating that we are doing this with a larger purpose in mind, then allowing that relationship to flourish, because at the end of it, there's a very good chance that the person who is going through the mentorship is going to actually augment or make your organization itself better. I think that becomes a very matured stance that the organization can take. And I fear that when organizations realize that it's not aligning with the current organization's purpose or the organization's current purpose, now that's when there might be a few bottlenecks that would probably come in. But if organizations are able to go beyond that, that'll be great.
Yeah, and in with respect to all the things that we have spoken about how to think about future relevance and these dynamics around, say, coaching, building your own social capital, in this sphere, what do you think has changed post March 2020, which has seen a major shift in a lot of ways of working for organizations? But has any of this changed fundamentally?
And I go back to my favorite statement. I made this at the beginning of the pandemic, right? A lot has changed, but nothing has changed, right? What if I say what has changed? It's the mechanisms of accessing leadership, mechanism accessing mentors, mechanisms of accessing or a dissipation of knowledge or acquisition of knowledge. I think the virtual mode has become predominant in all of this. But at the same time, nothing has changed, because the end outcome or the goal out of this is to basically, if it's about creating value, okay, the same is to happen through different forms. Earlier, it now you have ways of doing it differently. But the important thing to note is that apart from the ultimate truth that exists, which is gory, but then the other truth is the fact that you can only raise your stock by raising your perceived value. I think this will never change. This will stand the test of time. With that in mind, if that is your pursuit, then you would seek different ways of reaching that particular goal, despite changes or shifts or disruptions that are happening out there, because that is never going to change. You should know who your stakeholder is. If you know the answer to what your stakeholder sees as value, then the only thing you need to do, I'm going to simplify, the only thing you need to know is from your current state, what are the changes you're going to make sure that value is getting generated. That's a simple equation to do, but this journey is very difficult to follow, right? Yeah, this journey, then once the difficult part is, of course, getting an answer out there, but the equally difficult part is to execute on that journey, because a lot of people live in the present. Jumping away from the change is not something that, unless you're forced to do it or you don't have any choice, you would still try to stick to the same routines.
Right. Yeah. So the fundamentals and first principles still remain the same. And you just need to give attention to the detail of the how.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it brings me to a slightly different example, but I wanted to bring it in. I had the privilege of listening to Pulela Gopichand, and Gopichand was asked by the interviewer as to how have you been successful? At the onset, it seemed such a mundane question to ask, but then the answer made that question very special. So the answer Gopichand gave to that question was, it was very easy for me, because when I was playing tournaments in school, I knew that I had to be better than those one or two people in school for me to move to the next level. The next level was the district level. I knew that at the district level, I just had to be good, better than those one or two people and get success. Then I moved to the state level. I realized there were just those one or two people that were there, and I was state champion. Then it was nationals. And then I realized there were just those one or two people that I had to be better than, and there was national champion. Then at the international, there was just one or two people that were there, and I could win the All England and do it, right? So this one or two people makes it sound very simple, but you have to realize one thing is that the entire benchmark itself was changing from the school level to district level to state level. So Pulela Gopichand could do all that to come to that benchmark level and then differentiate. Then differentiate from those two or three or one or two people that he's talking about. So raising the benchmark is a continuous development journey. You got to be at that level. Let's assume that you are an architect in a company. You have to be at the level of architects in your company at least, or in the market or whatever. If you are like in a marketing specialist, you had to be at that level. What would differentiate is that looking at your playing field around, let's think that there are three or four, these are top architects. What do I now need to do to be better than them? Being able to identify that, and what does better than, what is the value, perceived value they bring to the people who consume their services, and how do I now create a value that is better, right? So that is what becomes extremely important to do. So like I said, it's important to build the basic skills, but it's extremely important also to build differentiated skills.
And when you're talking about benchmarking, again, what I am taking from that is the outside in perspective. Yeah, that's been one of my biggest takeaways from this chat for the last 1 hour. So I'll move to the last section where we'll ask you a couple of prescriptive things, and then I'll ask you about some hot takes. So first, let's go with the prescriptive ones. So 3 books or resources that you would recommend for any corporate professional.
Playing to Win, clearly Playing to Win by Lafley and Martin. Awesome book on strategy, very practical, talks about A.G. Lafley's experience in Procter and Gamble and how it's laid out. Very practical if you're able to take it up. You don't need to read all the chapters, but then if you're able to get the essence, I would highly recommend this book. The next one is the latest book by Adam Grant, Think Again. I think very relevant to the things that you've been asking, Harish, in terms of challenging your own paradigms and what you built with and continuously evolving. So that Adam Grant is one of my favorite thinkers, management thinkers, authors, you call it whatever. His book on networking is also fairly epic. But then Think Again is something that I would recommend highly. So these are as far as books are concerned. I would also suggest for people in the management who reach the management, I would suggest that you, if not anything, at least subscribe to Harvard Business Review or MIT Sloan Review, certain Twitter feeds, Farnham Street, Naval Ravikant. So, all these people bring in a slightly different perspective. If you're able to take even their one-liners and think about it, ruminate on it, and then apply it to your context, I think these are very good sources to derive from.
Right. Yeah. And what would be the 3 things that, say, the ideal professional of the next decade would be expected to do?
The first thing is accept that there'll be ambiguity. And I'm again talking about as you rise in stature, because when you're at junior levels or just entering, you're going to have a lot of definitive tasks to do. But as you rise higher, the levels of ambiguities increase, right? So being able to be comfortable in ambiguity. And I keep this as a very favorite thing, right? The CEO of a company is asked to predict the company's performance for the year, whether it's 10% growth, 15% growth, 20% growth, profitability. And the CEO would do it without knowing where it's going to come from. Or it's an intelligent guess, but then the CEO doesn't know what the currency fluctuations would be, how the market would condition, because once that is done, the market is going to be unforgiving. You cannot give reasons for that. But then the CEO has the confidence of saying that I'm going to state this, knowing fully well that there is a reasonable amount of ambiguity in what I'm asking for. And my team and I, we will figure out how to do it. Right? Having that confidence of being able to embrace ambiguity and deal with it, extremely important for it. The next one is again in the spirit of Think Again by Adam Grant, or the entire essence of this conversation is always look for making yourself irrelevant. How can you make what you're doing currently, how can you make that irrelevant? That's the other way of looking at it. It's very simple. If there's a certain business process that you're following that is paying your salary, make sure that you find out ways of automating it or reducing the dependence on it so that you can move on to other things. That you should have the confidence that you would be able to elevate yourself to create more value and then create time by making your current job irrelevant. So that becomes, so it could be either by delegating, governing, and then moving off. But then making yourself irrelevant to that particular job in hand is important. It definitely means that you've created a good amount of sustainability in the outcomes that job creates. You cannot be compromising on that. It doesn't mean you just walk away. You create sustainability for the organization and then move away, right? Through whatever mechanisms, through an org structure by delegating it, or through automation by making sure that we don't need people, or we need less people to work on this, and we'll move on to other things. So that's important. The third thing is about being comfortable with data, right? I kept talking about hypothesis, being able to extrapolate, bring in the outside in thinking and all, right? Eventually, when you have to convince stakeholders, okay, the stakeholders get convinced only by two things, okay? One is through the words of other credible people, through examples, credible examples. If I say that Sachin Tendulkar told me so, that this is how a cover drive has to be mastered and created, no one's going to second guess that particular thing, right? No one's going to second guess that particular thing. I say that this is what Sachin Tendulkar told me, and this is Sachin Tendulkar's quote, that this is how you should do a cover drive. But for people who do not have that access, then the only way to build credibility is through data, right? So making sure that you're creating credible stories to validate your hypothesis through data, I think that becomes very important, which means that you need to embrace data. And when I say data, I'm not saying static data. Remember, there is data, then there is information that comes from the data, then there is analysis that comes from the information that comes from data. So people normally see data that comes out there, right, in the form of a table. When I convert that data into graphs, I see information. Something is increasing, something is decreasing, right? But what is not very evident when I come in as an audience is why is that happening? Because that is where your cognitive skills come in. So when I say be comfortable with data, I'm saying build all these skills, use the data to show information, and then show your cognitive analytics. That is where you differentiate yourself, right? By being able to analyze the information you're saying. I think these three things, at least, there might be more, of course, but I think you asked me for three and I'm giving you these three, but these three for me come right away into the mind.
Right. I'll probably add a 3.1 there about storytelling with data. I think whatever intelligence you are deriving out of that, it has to be conveyed in the right form of story as well.
Hang on. Storytelling is very important.
Yeah.
So you need to intrigue the audience. You've got to make it interesting for them.
Correct. Yeah. All right. So we'll come to the last section, Prashant, where I'll ask you for your hot takes. I know the first one could probably be a separate 1 hour long Smartcast interview as well, but I'll still go ahead with that. And I'll expect a short answer from you. So what do you think is the future relevance of HR?
HR is relevant.
Yeah.
No, I'll go beyond that. Again, I'm saying out here that future relevance of HR lies in being relevant to the business. So and I know a lot of steps are happening in that direction. When I say business, HR clearly has to identify its role in either the revenue or profitability, or whatever it could be the business. If you are HR in a business for a social cause, then a social cause could be, but then HR for is the charter, has to clearly be able to map out in their mind what is the connection to the company's goals, right? Again, bring in outside in perspective. Nothing changes, right? I mean, HR as a function, to bring in outside in perspective, saying that, okay, my company is making forays into this geography or into this segment. What is HR's role into doing it? So you have to move away from your current, just your regular paradigms. I know that there are the 9-box paradigm. These are good tools to have, but how do we use all these tools and frameworks that we have to eventually, so those cannot be the end in itself, because a company doesn't benefit by the HR rules, for that matter, any functions rules being the end in itself. The end has to hook on to the companies and business outcomes. So it's once HR, or for that matter, any function realizes that, then there is definitely relevance in the whole. Okay, look at the whole word relevance, right? The word relevance has become relevant because times are changing. And you need to be at least upfront. It's like the Red Queen hypothesis from Alice in Wonderland, right? You need to keep running to even stay static. So even so much also true for HR. The whole paradigm is changing. The paradigm changed completely last year. So how are we being relevant? Are the same engagement models going to work? Same training methods going to work? No, certain things need to change in order for you to even be relevant. And if you actually have to go beyond relevance and add value, then you'll be constantly aligned to business outcomes and making sure that you earn your seat at the table.
Right. Yeah. Okay. The next one, what is the future relevance of managers?
The same thing. You look at managers, right? I'm going to simplify it by saying there are 3 levels in a company. There are the doers, which earn the dollar, right? The person who codes, my client actually pays for that code or the outcome of that code. Then there is the executive layer, the people who decide, let's say the strategy, vision, product roadmap. And then there is a layer in the middle, which I'll call as a manager for simplicity. Now it's in a very unique position, right? Because it's in between the executive layer and out here. So the manager's role is to be able to first be able to understand what's happening at the top. Why are executive decisions being taken? And then being able to translate it into action below. That's like the most. So you cannot just be aggregators, because typically managers are known to be aggregators. Aggregation happens from the bottom, okay, and is pushed to the top. So there is zero value coming out there, especially in these days with everything going remote. There is direct access for layers above to layers below, so the manager's role can get redundant unless the manager realizes that he or she can be a linchpin. Okay, and when I say linchpin, a linchpin is, of course, you will do aggregation, you have to do it, you have to do the reporting and all. But then what are you doing in two dimensions of the company's work? One is in being able to translate the company's objectives, okay, into the way your team is functioning. So for example, if the company is under cost pressure or profitability pressure, then how are you creating your org structure below you, or creating processes, or investing in automation to make things that you are delivering things better, faster, or cheaper, right? You have to focus on these three aspects. A manager is expected to add value on these three dimensions of what his or her team is delivering. How am I doing it better? How am I doing faster? How am I doing it cheaper? In the context of the company might say that we are having quality, we are going to differentiate on quality, we are going to be the best. So better becomes more prominent. If the company is on a huge, very fast growth path, then faster becomes prominent. I'm not saying compromise on the other two axes.
Right.
Being able to understand that this is where the company is headed, and being able to have your beachhead for your group, focusing on that particular piece while keeping above average performance on the other two, becomes very important for the manager to focus on. And that's where his or her stakeholders will all say, okay, this particular person gets it. Okay, so I didn't need to monitor him so much. So maybe let's scale his or her responsibilities. Right. So that's how growth would also happen for that person.
Yeah, I think that's very pertinent. The third one, Prashant, GICs, as they call it, is Global In-House Centers. But I want to think, or rather refer to these geographical sites. Are those geographical sites, is there an identity of an India site or a Pune site or a Bangalore site? Is that going to change?
So are you saying identity within the country or the country as a whole? What are you referring to?
Yeah, so these sites that are there for these MNCs, where there are development centers which have started as a geographical location in the whole, whether it is part of India or a global footprint of a company, is there any relevance for this identity of a geographical site?
See, if I have to live in a completely imaginary world, if I have to paint, and there would be no relevance. Right. But then, because, and that's the right thing to say also these days, because we've gone all virtual. So whether the talent is in Cupertino or whether it is in Pune 4 Prabhat Road, it should not matter, right? Because it's eventually going to generate the value. But then that's easier said than done, because there is still a physical manifestation to the talent. There's a physical background to the talent that we are talking about. And talent just doesn't emerge by switch of a button. So there is a whole upbringing, there is an academic upbringing, there is a social interaction based upbringing that leads to a talent being what it is, right? It's not just about knowledge in the field, but it's also about the mindset. For example, Silicon Valley mindset is that of growth, of that of innovation. Whether you like it or not, even an average person is actually elevated to a high level. Similarly, I mean, you go to the IITs or in the top colleges out there, you are forced to survive in a higher plane. So you become better. So there is a role for the location also to play. There is no question about it. Of course, the current times is going to make those boundaries hazier. But then, at least in the near-term reality, I would still say that the location would have a role to play. Your backgrounds would have a role to play. But then, where you are working from might not matter. What you've gone through in your life or what you are subjecting yourself to otherwise would definitely have a role to play.
Right. Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. Prashant, I'm not going to let you go without me asking this final question. What is the future relevance of Test cricket?
We will know towards the later part of this month. If India wins, then it's going to be extremely relevant for us. I really hope that India end up winning. But then you also have to look at it in the context of all that we've spoken. Test cricket itself has evolved. If I look at the positivity rate of test cricket, using that word in today's context, we see results happening out of almost every match. There's because, and that's because the influence of T20 and one day cricket. Clearly, we are seeing results coming. It's the mindsets of captains, mindsets of players. So I think Test cricket itself, in my view, I think one day cricket might start losing its relevance because I don't know where it stands. It's too long for a day. It's not, and T20 caters to that. We're talking about T10s also, right? I don't know how that will work, but T20 caters.
Hundreds.
At the same time, the test cricket is like a test of strategy, right? It's a test of your tenacity. It's a test of many other skills that come in. So, in my view, test cricket and T20 might have a future. The one day part is the one that probably risks relevance.
Yeah, I think it's neither here nor there. They haven't figured out what game they want to play with ODIs. Yeah, I think this was a fantastic conversation, Prashant. In spite of having interacted with you so many times on similar topics, I've had some great things to pick up and glean from this 1 hour long chat. Thinking outside in is going to be my mantra for the next few months or years, because I think that's extremely important. So thanks a lot for this great conversation, Prashant.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure always talking to you, Harish, either virtually or physically. I myself derived a lot. Your questions were great. Thanks for having me on this.
Yeah, thank you.